So after telling part one last month, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm not sure that 19 years old is a great age to become a fugitive. I'm not sure that any age is a great age to become a fugitive, but that's the age that it happened to me. And if any of you here in the crowd tonight are thinking about becoming a fugitive, you look like you might be considering it. Well, if any of you are considering it, I recommend having a basic checklist. First on the checklist, it's kind of an obvious one, commit a crime. Now, I was being charged with 2 Class A felonies and a Class B felony, but to each his own, whatever tickles your fancy. Now, second on the checklist, choose a country that you're going to flee to. Now, I recommend choosing a country that has no extradition agreement with the United States. Now, I chose Brazil mostly because I had a good friend teaching English down there who said he could get me a job. But, you know, there's plenty of great countries with no extradition agreement, but Brazil, solid choice. And third on the checklist, raise as much money as you can and then get the fuck out of the country. That's kind of the whole nuts and bolts of the whole operation. Now, if you are going to flee the country, I also recommend having, a little support team. I recommend keeping the support team small. People have loose lips. Now, my support team consisted of my old roommate, Simon, my friend Chris, and his girlfriend, Carrie. Solid support team, really solid support team. So to raise funds, I sold everything that I owned of value. Now, understand, I grew up blue collar. I didn't want for anything, but there was never any surplus of cash. So I sold everything that I owned of value. First thing that I sold was my guitar. I had a 1963 Fender Telecaster. Sold that, sold all my furniture, sold my snowboard, sold an extra fly rod. I sold anything and everything that anyone would buy. And at the end of the big sale, I had around $2,500. Not a great fugitive fund, but doable. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to get out of the country. I knew that I wanted a direct flight. I didn't want any layovers in Miami or Dallas or anything like that. And I found out that a lot of the direct flights, to Brazil were out of LA. So my old roommate Simon, he agreed to drive me to LA in his black Nissan Sentra. Now, there's also some really hard parts in making the decision to flee the country. And one of the hardest parts is saying goodbye to family. Now, obviously, I couldn't say goodbye to my parents because they'd be like, no, you're staying here. You're going to face the music. But my siblings, Now, my older brother, he was actually living over in Denmark. He'd met this Danish nanny over here in the States, moved over to Denmark. The guy was actually getting married in 5 months, probably going to miss the wedding. He was going to be pissed about that. But then I had my younger brother and sister. Brother was a junior in high school. Sister was a freshman in high school. So the day before I was going to leave, I called up the family house. Luckily, my sister answered. I was like, hey, Lou, walk to a room where Mom and Dad can't hear you. So she walks to another room, and I was like, are you clear? She's like, yeah. I was like, hey, Lou, I've got into some serious trouble, and I'm fleeing the country, and I want to meet with you and Ike tomorrow after school to say goodbye. She's like, okay. I was like, I know this is a lot. I promise you, I'll explain everything tomorrow. Can you meet me at 152nd and Powell at that convenience store? She's like, yeah. I was like, Lou, I'll explain everything tomorrow, I promise. She's like, okay. And I was like, and Lou, I got a huge favor to ask. Can you and Ike bring all the cash that you have? I promise, I'll pay you guys back. I'll explain everything tomorrow, okay? She's like, okay. I was like, all right, tomorrow, after school, 152nd Powell. She's like, okay. I was like, Lou, I gotta go. She's like, all right. Tomorrow? She's like, all right, tomorrow. And then I hang up. Can you guys imagine getting that phone call as a freshman in high school? Fuck, What kind of phone call is that? So after that, after the phone call, I'm putting together my fugitive backpack. I'm hanging out with my support team. Now, I'd bought a lot of nice clothes to teach English in, so I'm packing in my slacks and my collared shirts, some nice shoes, packing in my regular everyday clothes, some basic toiletries, a few books to read, a journal to write in, and of course, I brought a fly rod and some basic fishing supplies. Because for me, no matter where you live in the world, hopefully there's a place to fish. So I'm hanging out with the support team. We're kind of going over the game plan. And then as we're going over it, Carrie, she comes up to me and she hands me this book. And it's Winsburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson. She says, hey, this is one of my favorite books. And one of my favorite stories is Paper Pills. And I really want you to have this book. I was like, oh, okay, great. And give her a hug. It was really nice of her. Pack that into the fugitive backpack. So I finish up packing up the backpack. We're talking about going over the game plan. We hang out for a couple more hours, and then I say goodnight to Chris and Carrie because, I'm leaving. And then the next morning, wake up, and Simon, he drives me to Portland. Now, Simon, I met this guy my freshman year in college, and we lasted about a week in the dorms. The guy kind of looks like Townes Van Sant, one of my favorite singers. He also had a bit of a wild streak in him. That's why he was roommates with me. So Simon, he drives me to Portland, and I meet up with my brother and sister. And it was a strange and painful meeting. I explained to my brother and sister what I had done, why I was running, where I was running to, my fear of prison, the whole thing. And they understood. They understood why I was running. And my brother and sister, they came through financially. They added another $430 to the fugitive fund, which was huge. So, we cry it out, we hug it out, I say goodbye to them, I was like, I'll call you guys as soon as I get to Brazil. I was like, and you guys can't tell mom and dad, give me 5 days. 5 days. They're like, all right. So we hug it out, say goodbye to them, and then Simon and I, we hit the road, start driving to LA. And we drive straight through, nonstop. And at this point, the whole weight of this whole decision really started to catch up to me. Tinges of paranoia are starting to creep in at this point. Was that a cop? The weight of the whole decision really started to weigh on me. So we drive straight through, and then it's 7 in the morning the next morning. We're on that spot on I-5 where you drop down into the valley and you see the greater Los Angeles area expand out in front of you. And we pull over at one of the next exits. It's one of those exits, just a bunch of gas stations and fast food. And I go and I find a payphone. Remember, this is 1999. There used to be payphones. So I'd done my research beforehand, and I knew that United Airlines had a bunch of flights out of LA, direct flights. So I called up United Airlines and I bought a ticket. My flight was leaving the next day at 4 in the afternoon, so 34 hours or something like that. And I used Simon's credit card, so it couldn't be traced back to me and my brilliant criminal mind. So, I buy the ticket, and then I say to Simon, I pay him back in cash, and I was like, let's just drive to the airport, make sure everything's in order, get the ticket printed out. So we drive to LAX, I go inside the airport, and I go up to the United Airlines ticket counter, pull out my passport, and the one behind the counter, she prints out the ticket. And as she's doing this, she's thumbing through my passport. And she looks at me and she says, where's your visa? I was like, what do you mean visa? That's how naive I was. She's like, yeah, if you want to travel to Brazil, you need a visa. I was like, how do you get a visa? She says, you apply through the Brazilian consulate. I was like, where's the Brazilian consulate? She says, there's actually one here in LA, but there's no way you're going to get a visa in 24 hours. And I say, could you please write down the address of the Brazilian consulate? She's like, sure. She writes that down on a piece of paper, and then she hands me the piece of paper and my ticket back and my passport. I take all those, and I walk back over to Simon. I'm like, Simon, we got a new mission. So we start frantically driving around LA and all the traffic and the madness, and we find the Brazilian consulate. It's like 1 or 2 in the afternoon at this point. And I know there's a new Brazilian consulate in LA these days, but back then, it was just this like giant house in this neighborhood. So I walk into the Brazilian consulate, you know, and I go up to the front desk and I ask the lady, I was like, can I speak to someone about getting a visa? She's like, sure. So she gets on the phone. A little while later, this woman appears, you know, she comes out. She's like, how can I help you? And I think there were tears already streaming down my face before I even started speaking. I was like, I'm such an idiot. I didn't know that you'd like needed a visa to go down to Brazil. And like, I got this job through college and I just didn't even understand it. I'm such an idiot. Obviously, my story was complete bullshit, but the tears streaming down my face, they were real. And the woman, she's like, hold on. She takes sympathy on me, you know? She's like, we can solve this. And like, she goes back to her office, and an hour and a half later, she comes out of her office. She's holding this little square piece of paper. And she walks up to the desk, you know, she opens up my passport, and you want to talk about music to my ears? The sound of that stapler stapling my visa into my passport, chunk, 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 chunk. Oh, I was back in the world. Game was back on. I was so excited. And I'm hugging that Brazilian consulate lady like, I love you. Wiping the tears from my face. I was so excited. So Simon and I, you know, after the Brazilian consulate, we go out and then like we go and find a cheap motel to stay in. We find a place to stay, find a cheap motel in East Hollywood. And we unload all our stuff, check into our room, unload our stuff. And we're walking around the city because I've got a lot of nervous energy to burn off at this point. You know, it's so hard to explain my mental state at this point. It's just this volcano of like emotions and thoughts erupting in my mind over and over. We're just walking around the city and it's like, am I really doing this? Is this really happening? What's life in Brazil gonna be like? Am I gonna die? Is this gonna work out? Just this volcano of emotions and thoughts erupting over and over. So a couple hours later, we wander back to our motel room. I did not sleep all that well that night, obviously. And the next morning, we wake up. Simon and I, we go to a restaurant, go have some breakfast, and then he drives me to the airport. And he drives me to LAX. You know, we get out of the car, he walks me into the airport, and I say goodbye to him. You know, because he went above and beyond the call of duty that any friend should have ever had to do, you know. So I give him a hug, say goodbye to him, and he wishes me luck. And then I go up to the United Airlines ticket counter, I check my fugitive backpack. And then it's the moment of truth, you know. I have to go through the security check. Because I have no idea if any alerts had been put out on me at this point. So I go up to the TSA agent, the security agent, hand him my passport, my boarding pass, you know, I'm all nervous. He scans my passport, nothing. No alerts, no beeps, no bleeps, no nothing. I'm through. So I walk, you know, I go down to my gate where my flight, you know, is gonna board, and I have a couple hours to wait. And like at this point, none of it even feels real. I feel like I'm a character in some movie or a character in some novel. And I'm sitting there, you know, in this chair, like waiting for my flight, you know, and I pull out my wallet, decide to see what's left in the fugitive fund. I have $183. Things were gonna be tight. But I was gonna make it. I was determined to make it. So a little while later, the plane pulls up and they start calling for passengers to board. And, you know, I board the airplane, sit in my seat, you know, and then the plane, you know, a little while later, it backs up and we start rolling down the tarmac. And man, as far as that fugitive checklist goes, let me tell you, nothing will prepare you for that moment when your plane takes off and you look out of the little window and you see America disappearing beneath you.